Rob Burgundy.
Field reporter, it's McGee. Welcome to Channel 4 News.
Good morning, San Diego. This is Rob Burgundy, Channel 4 News. This just in, at 10:18 p.m. last night, July 17, 1944, a munitions explosion rocked the West Coast at Port Chicago Naval Magazine, killing 320 sailors and civilians and injuring 390 others. Port Chicago is home to an ammunition loading dock capable of loading 2 ships at once. Those 2 ships were the E.A. Bryan and the Quinault Victory. The U.S. vessel, the E.A. Bryan, had been previously loaded with 4,600 tons of ammunition, including 1,000-pound bombs, 300,000 gallons of heavy diesel fuel, common projectiles such as many calibers of bullets, as well as fragmentation clusters. We have for you a drawing of the suspected location of these munitions. All of the ammunition built unto itself to create a massive explosion, one that is equal to a 5.5 kiloton bomb. Some citizens have actually accused government officials about lying to the public to keep it hush-hush. The explosion was described as this: a metallic sound and rending timbers, such as made by a falling boom. Immediately afterward, an explosion occurred on the pier, and a fire started. 5, 6, or 7 seconds later, we are still unsure, a more powerful explosion took place as the majority of the ammunition within and near the E.A. Bryan detonated in a huge fireball 3 miles in diameter. Chunks of white-hot metal and burning ammunition were flung over 12,000 feet in the air. The E.A. Bryan was completely destroyed, and the Quinault Victory was blown out of the water, torn into sections, and thrown in several different directions. The stern, the rear of the ship, landed upside down in the water nearly 500 feet away. The U.S. Coast Guard boat stationed nearby was thrown 600 feet upriver, where it sank in many pieces. The pier, along with its many boxcars, locomotives, rails, cargo, and men, were blasted into pieces instantaneously. Nearby boxcars were bent by just the force of the shock of the explosion. The port's barracks and other buildings, and much of the surrounding town, was severely damaged. Shattering glass and a rain of jagged metal, as well as undetonated munitions, caused many additional injuries to both medical, civilian, and military population, although no one outside the immediate area was killed. Nearly $9.9 million worth of damage took place in this short period of time. This was caused to a U.S. government. I have now been told that we are allowed to release photos of what is left of Port Chicago Naval Magazine. We are now going to It's McGee, who interviewed a pilot, Amelia Lee, who was caught in the explosion last night.
Hello, San Diego. I'm Tits McGee, here with Amelia Lee, a pilot who was flying over Port Chicago at the time of the explosion. How are you today, Miss Lee?
Fine, thank you.
Come with me. Let's take a walk. So, what did you see as you were flying over Port Chicago?
Well, I saw chunks of white-hot metal flying straight towards my plane.
How big were these white chunks you speak of?
Well, the chunks were as big as houses.
So, with these scalding white house chunks of hot metal flying around you, how did you manage to keep your poise?
Well, McGee, it was a terrifying experience, but I called into HQ, and they told me that they were working on the problem. So, I kept my course for a few minutes, and after those minutes, I was out of harm's way.
I'm sure that was a terrifying experience. What was going through your mind at the time of the explosion?
Well, I thought that we were being attacked by communists at first. But then I called into HQ, and they told me it was an accidental ammunition explosion. So I was no longer worried.
Did you know anybody working on the docks at the time of the ammo going up?
I did not know any of the men personally, but I grieve for all the families that were impacted.
Thank you for your time. This is Tits McGee. Now back to you, Rob Burgundy.
Of the 390 injured are sailors of the U.S. Navy and are being detained and accused of a crime unique to the armed forces, mutiny. It's McGee's They're Live, on scene in Oakland, California. Please keep in mind while watching this interview that the 50 sailors and seamen of the U.S. Navy are being detained for mutiny. Mutiny being a conspiracy among members of a group of similarly situated individuals that want to openly oppose, change, or overthrow an existing authority.
We spoke with U.S. Navy officials and were granted access into the detaining barge, where the 50 sailors are being held for their mutinous actions. I'm here live with First Class Seaman Carl Tuggle. How are you today, Mr. Tuggle?
Frustrated, that's all.
What were your duties at Port Chicago?
I guess I was like a boxcar loader. We really didn't have titles back then.
So you loaded boxcars with ammunitions and weapons.
In fact, we loaded from 40 millimeters all the way up to 2,000-pound bombs.
Did you wear gloves or did you work with like bare hands?
No, we were supplied with clothing, but everything else we had to buy for ourselves.
So if you didn't wear gloves, you were to handle these ammunitions and explosions with your sweaty, bare hands.
Yes, with bare hands.
The explosion happened July 17th, 1944, yesterday. Where were you when it happened?
It happened around 9:30 when the explosion occurred. I was in my bed. Just automatically blew me out of my bed. I got cuts from the glass stuff from my hands and feet, jumping from the bunk onto the floor.
The next morning, all the workers were outside, including yourself, and you refused to work. Is that correct?
Well, actually, let me put you in perspective for you, because you'll find out that they had an investigation report which was done by the Navy. And this report had a lot of statements and a lot of information in it that was incorrect. Actually, we were never given an order to go back to work. We would ask the question, were we going back to work? That's what happened out there, but they said we disobeyed an order, but that didn't happen.
You were asked if you would go back to work,
Yes, that's what happened.
and you refused to?
We didn't refuse to work. We said we weren't going to load the ammunition on those ships, but we would go to work.
Then you were imprisoned and sentenced on a barge?
Actually, we were detained on a barge. We weren't in prison on a barge, but we couldn't leave. We were detained on the barge and shipped here to Oakland, California. They said we were sentenced, but I don't remember having a trial. If we were sentenced, our time was spent in the bridge while they followed procedure. I was never court-martialed. I was just put in the brig.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Tuggle. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Now back to you, Rob Burgundy.
After the fires had subsided from earlier today, the gruesome task of cleaning up body parts and corpses begun. So far, only 51 of the 320 killed have been identified. The rest have been deemed unrecognizable from the burned, charred, and missing limbs. We would now like to have a moment of silence for the great men and women caught in the explosion of Port Chicago's naval base.
This was Rob Burgundy, Channel 4 News. Remember, stay classy, San Diego.